The team.
Very good.
Whakarunga mai, koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. In just over 24 hours, the number of Delta cases has multiplied from 1 to 7. The Prime Minister warns there's more to come too. It's confirmed the variant is from the out-of-control New South Wales outbreak. But right now, we don't know exactly how it jumped the ditch. Contact tracers are racing the clock. There are more locations of interest in Auckland too. We'll have all the details and the Minister Chris Hipkins live. South Island businesses back the lockdown despite no known cases there, and another record-breaking number of COVID cases in New South Wales. So why no further restrictions? Don't forget you can watch us live on Facebook.
Ahi Marie, RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. Genomic sequencing has linked the first community case in Auckland to the New South Wales COVID-19 outbreak. 6 more community cases have been confirmed today, bringing the total number to 7. All of the cases are linked to the initial case, a 58-year-old North Shore man who has the Delta variant. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says officials are trying to establish how and when the virus got here. She says genome sequencing results due tonight will show if there is any link to 3 Sydney cases of COVID-19 at managed isolation since July the 1st.
Already we have really important information, and our ability to narrow down that this is a case that is linked to the New South Wales outbreak gives us a lot of leads to chase down as quickly as we can.
Jacinda Ardern says the government will contact every recent returnee from Australia if the community case cannot be linked back to MIQ. There have been long queues and delays at testing stations in Auckland and Wellington today. A teacher at Auckland's Avondale College is among the new community cases of COVID-19. Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield says those connected to Avondale College will be contacted with specific instructions.
There is a 25-year-old female teacher from an Auckland high school, that is Avondale College, and that college has been contacted, and the community will be receiving specific information about what to do to follow up testing and isolation, of course, for anyone who may have been in contact with that person.
Dr Bloomfield says people can expect this outbreak to grow to up to 120 cases. The police say anyone breaching restrictions against gatherings during lockdown faces being arrested. 8 people have been arrested at anti-lockdown protests today in Auckland, Nelson and Tauranga. The Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa, says there is a low tolerance for any unlawful gathering, particularly in the context of a Delta variant outbreak. He says people should know the rules by now and anyone thwarting them will be arrested.
Clearly the restrictions are there for a reason, and that's to keep everyone safe. Where we're gathering in large numbers, we create a risk, and we've seen in New South Wales what happens when you get large protests, and they can become spreading events.
The police say they're considering whether to charge the 4 people arrested in Auckland. The national Pfizer vaccine rollout will recommence tomorrow. More than 55,000 doses of the vaccine were administered yesterday, a new record. However, the program was paused following the announcement of the lockdown to give district health boards time to implement contingency plans. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the nationwide program is resuming tomorrow. But some centres may not be able to accommodate as many bookings under the lockdown conditions. She says anyone who needs to have their booking rescheduled will be contacted directly. The Reserve Bank has held the official cash rate at a record low 0.25%. It has given the uncertainty caused by the new COVID-19 outbreak as justification for leaving policy unchanged despite growing inflation pressures and the strong labour market. Economists had regarded a rise in the rate as a near certainty had it not been for the new lockdown. The bank's governor, Adrian Orr, says the need to reinstate COVID-19 containment measures in many countries highlights the serious ongoing health and economic risks posed by the virus.
Today's reintroduction of level 4 restrictions to activity across New Zealand is another stark example of how unpredictable and how disruptive this virus can be to economic activity.
Adrian Orr says the New Zealand economy is in a very strong position. Moving now into sport, the All Blacks' third Bledisloe Cup test against the Wallabies in Perth is in doubt following the West Australian government's introduction of new quarantine rules for those arriving from New Zealand. The state has declared New Zealand low risk, but introduced new rules after the country went into lockdown yesterday. The All Blacks are due to leave on Sunday. West Australian Premier Mark McGowan says he's unsure if next week's Perth test will go ahead.
Obviously, they've locked down, so it would be odd if people were to arrive from New Zealand and not be in a form of lockdown or isolation.
The Wallabies were granted an exemption by the New Zealand government to come to Auckland for the first two Bledisloe Cup tests. The COVID-19 lockdown won't stop the New Zealand Paralympic team leaving for Tokyo over the next few days. Some of the team have already arrived in Tokyo, while some are heading there from other countries. There are 20 athletes and 20 support staff still in New Zealand due to leave over the next few days. Paralympic New Zealand has been working with Sport New Zealand to get the team out of the country safely and in accordance with Alert Level 4 guidelines. Prior to leaving, the team was required to follow 14-day health monitoring programs and returned 3 negative COVID tests. All team members will also be tested upon arrival into Japan and have to undergo daily tests while in Tokyo. The Paralympics start next Wednesday, and that's the news.
In lockdown again.
The best place can be right now is level 4 and following all the level 4 rules.
Back in our bubbles.
We've got scooters and bikes and everything ready to go. We just go around the car park.
The team of 5 million is back.
We're all in the same locker together. We've done it before, we've beaten it before, and we can beat it again.
Come together with Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
RNZ National, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa, now an official COVID-19 update. All of New Zealand is now at COVID-19 alert level 4. The alert level will be reviewed after 3 days for all areas except Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, which is likely to remain at level 4 for an initial period of 7 days. Stay home where possible and follow the alert level 4 guidelines. This will stop the spread of COVID-19 and save lives. Everyone is asked to wear a mask and keep a 2-metre distance from others whenever you leave your home. If you are sick, call your doctor or health line on 0800 358 5453 for advice about getting tested. Keep scanning QR codes whenever you leave your home and practice good hygiene. Wash hands often. Services including supermarkets, pharmacies, clinics and petrol stations will stay open at alert level 4. Face coverings are mandatory for all people, both employees and customers at businesses and services operating at alert level 4 involving customer contact. For more information, go to covid19.govt.nz. And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rapare Thursday. Northland to Manawatu, including Taihape and Taumaranui. Showers today, some thundery with hail and snow lowering to 1,000 metres. Partly cloudy with isolated showers tomorrow. For Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, showers with possible thunderstorms and hail clearing to fine overnight. Some cloud returning tomorrow afternoon. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers, possibly thundery, clearing overnight and becoming fine. For Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Nelson, scattered showers clearing this evening, generally fine tomorrow. For Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine today, apart from showers in Fiordland, scattered rain tomorrow and possible thunderstorms in Fiordland. For Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, fine, but cloud increasing in Otago tomorrow with evening showers. For Clutha and Southland, partly cloudy with scattered showers near the coast, spreading elsewhere for a time tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, showers, possibly thundery, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rapare Thursday. It is now 8 minutes past 5.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. And then there was 7. In the 24 hours since the Delta strain of COVID was confirmed in the community, one case has swiftly turned into 7. The Devonport man's 20-year-old workmate has tested positive. That worker's flatmate, who is a fully vaccinated nurse, has the Delta strain too, and she was likely infectious during 4 shifts at Auckland Hospital. 2 other flatmates, including an Avondale College teacher, have also tested positive. And 2 friends of the people in that flat have the highly infectious Delta strain too. Some of them have been to several locations with high numbers of people, including church and bars. Health authorities are scrambling to identify contacts and places of interest. Genome testing also shows the Devonport man, or Case A as he's known, has the Delta variant originating from New South Wales. Now remember, when the Trans-Tasman bubble was suspended because of the outbreaks in Australia, Kiwis were allowed to fly home with special conditions, including 14 days MIQ for some. But exactly how this version of the virus has jumped the ditch is still a mystery. Ko taku manuhiri I Naianei, ko Chris Hipkins, the COVID response minister. Minister, good evening. Can you start with any updates, please?
We know that there'll be more cases, and we're seeing more cases coming through. I don't have details of those cases, but yes, I can confirm that we have had further positive test results since the press conference today, and we'll share details with those as they are confirmed.
Understand that you can't give lots of specifics, but generally a number, Minister. How many more? Are we talking several?
There have been several more cases. I don't have details of those cases to share at this point. Less than 10 though, but there will almost certainly be more cases overnight as well.
Minister, are these cases confined still to the Auckland and Coromandel area, or are they spread further afield?
So far, that would appear to be the case.
So contained within those 2 regions right now?
Well, look, I can't give that for absolute certainty, because one of the things that we do, we get a positive test result where the person is, doesn't necessarily reflect where they have been whilst they are infectious. So it's possible that people have been out of that area. We will share information as quickly as we can where there's a public health reason for doing that, and when obviously we keep people regularly updated at 1 o'clock every day as well. But the key thing here is we're at level 4, so if everyone's following the level 4 rules, then we'll be able to contain the spread.
So we now know that this is the New South Wales strain. It's what the 58-year-old has. What's your working theory here, Minister?
Look, there are a variety of theories, and I'm not narrowing it down. I'm not ruling anything out. We've had people coming back from New South Wales who have tested positive whilst staying in MIQ, so I certainly wouldn't discount the possibility that somehow it's escaped from the MIQ. There's also the possibility that someone has somehow jumped the border, if you like, by travelling from New South Wales to another Australian state and then flying back without being detected. So I wouldn't discount that as a possibility. We're not ruling anything out.
Regardless of the means by which it's got across from Australia, any way you look at it, it's a border failure, isn't it?
Look, if there has been a breach of some sort, an incursion of the virus, then yes, that's disappointing. We put as many systems as possible in place to avoid that, but somehow the virus has got into the country.
So what do we know about the match, right? So we know it's from New South Wales, but how far back to a particular case and specifically within what time frame is the information that you're getting from Australia?
We're talking about within the last couple of weeks. So the cases that it most closely matches were the cases that were detected in Australia within the last few weeks. So not in the last few days, but certainly within the last few weeks. Those are the cases that it most closely matches. So and that would fit with a potential chain of transmission that saw it coming into New Zealand. So we get more pieces of the puzzle every day, or every few hours even, as more results come in. We don't yet have a confirmed chain of transmission, though.
I understand this is moving really quickly, right? But given what you know now, can you tell us any more about the sequence of infection? Are you convinced that the 58-year-old from Devonport is the index case in New Zealand?
No, it's almost certain that they were given COVID-19 by someone else. And what we're trying to do is identify how many steps in that chain of transmission were there before we got to our Devonport case.
In terms of people returning to New Zealand after the bubble freeze, people were given different sets of rules they needed to follow. Some had to stay at home for 3 days and get tested, others went into MIQ. How vigorously was this policed, and also the pre-flight testing?
Well, in terms of pre-flight testing, I can say that in the period in question that we're talking about here, 100% of pre-flight tests were checked at the airport in Australia before those people were allowed to get on the plane. So they all would have produced.
What about the stay-at-home rules and the 3 days isolation at home?
In terms of the stay-at-home rules, so for those who are travelling from Victoria, I can confirm that every one of those people has returned a negative test result 3 days after arriving back in New Zealand, as they were required to do. So we've double-checked that. Everybody complied with that rule. In terms of New South Wales, people could only come from New South Wales in the period in question through our managed isolation facility, so spending the 14 days in MIQ.
So how far back are you tracking returnees, and are you tracking all of them? Are you getting in touch with all of them?
Obviously, if we can narrow it down, we will. We've got information at the ready. We've got really good information to both push notifications out to people and to get in touch with them if they're identified in any way as being, potentially within this chain or potentially linked to this chain.
But how many people are we talking about in terms of those returnees? How big is the group that you're focusing on?
If you're talking about people from New South Wales, it's potentially several thousand people who have come back. But as I said, they've all come back through our managed isolation
But
facility.
It'll be more than that, won't it, Minister? Sorry to interrupt, but you've said you're potentially looking at people who might have jumped the border in Australia. So you're potentially looking at all returnees from all states in Australia for a certain period of time.
Yeah, and that's many thousands of people. But what we can try and do is narrow down using the genome sequencing, using the dates, using the potential infection cycles. We can try and narrow down, and that's what our investigation teams are doing at the moment.
Avondale College, right? A teacher there tested positive for Delta. Why isn't there a testing station at the college?
Well, at the moment, the college is closed. We have got community testing stations being stood up around Auckland and around the country, in fact, so that we can...
Yeah, but parents are asking why there's not one on the college grounds that's in the neighbourhood close to them that they can go to and get their kids tested.
Look, we're not necessarily going to stand up a testing site at every location of interest, but we are standing up more testing sites. When the country's at level 4, obviously we want people only leaving home in order to go and get tested, but that doesn't mean that we can stand up testing sites absolutely everywhere. Obviously, we're doing a lot of testing at the moment.
Do you need to, Cabinet here, make a hurried decision about vaccinating under 16-year-olds and just get on with it?
Look, we'll have more to say about that over the next day or two around our under 16-year age cohort. We've been working through that process. You can expect to hear more from that very shortly.
So you're going to make a decision this week, are you, Minister?
Look, I'm not announcing something on your show tonight, but you can expect to hear more very shortly on that.
Given that there are a lot of young people involved here, they've gone to high, activities where there are big crowds and large volumes of people. How well have they done with using the Tracer app?
Feedback I've had is that we've been able to get good contact tracing information. I don't have detail of a breakdown of that versus memory versus QR code scans at this point.
Appreciate your time, Minister. Thanks for joining us. That is the COVID Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. Now, close to 3,000 students and teachers from one of the country's biggest schools have to self-isolate and get tested. A teacher from the school is confirmed to have COVID-19, and our reporter Nick Trubridge joins us from outside the school. Nick, what advice have these families been given?
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, well, as you've already pointed out, there are well upwards of 2,500 students here, and all of those students and staff have been advised to isolate for 14 days. Now, the advice is to isolate for 14 days, even if the lockdown does end after a week. I know the way things are going, that's pretty unlikely, but in the unlikely scenario that it does, you still must complete your 14 days. The advice for those students and teachers who are now considered close contacts is also to get a test. Now, the first test they should get is straight away. The second test they should get is next Monday, and then they're being asked to get a third test as well, so on the following Sunday. Now, of course, this all stems from the fact that one of the cases that was announced this morning, one of those 4 cases, is a teacher here. That sets off the trickle down, I suppose you could say, that, as you've pointed out, more than 2,500 students and staff are now required to self-isolate.
So what do we know about where these cases have been?
Yeah, great question. So we know that initially it was announced that they had been to Sky City Casino on Saturday night and maybe into the early hours of Sunday as well. As well as that, they've also been to a church in Freeman's Bay, Auckland Central Church of Christ. I went to that church today, actually. It's Ashley Bloomfield has called it a church. It's more of sort of a community centre, really. And if you look online, there have been other meetings there over the last, few weeks, few days as well. And actually, as we go to air at the moment, there's a new number of new locations of interest that have been announced. We've got Sweatshop Brew Kitchen on Sale Street, Friday 13th of August, 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Denny's CBD, 51 Hobson Street, again Auckland CBD, Friday as well, 1 a.m. to 1:30 a.m. Bar 101 on Elliott Street in Auckland, again Friday 11:33 p.m. to 1:15 p.m. Sky City Casino, as I mentioned, Pack and Save Whiteout Road on Saturday the 14th of August between 3:20 p.m. and 3:50 p.m. Green Bay Takeaways as well in Auckland, Monday 16th, 4 p.m. to 4:15 p.m. Now, that is not all of them. People need to go on to the Ministry of Health website to see updated locations. These have all been added today. Obviously, as I said, there are a few of them that were added this morning after the cases were announced, but this is updated information.
And Nick, we'll also put them on our webpage as well so that people can check them out there. Now, you well, for people who are listening rather than watching, you are diligently wearing your face mask, right? So there are new rules today around face masks. What are they?
That's right. So you need to wear one of these now if you're aged over 12 and you're going to any of those, those workplaces that are considered essential services. That's places like your supermarkets, places like your pharmacies, places like your dairies. It also extends to places like bus depots. So as the Prime Minister pointed out this morning, it's pretty much anywhere you can go at the moment, you must wear a mask. Anywhere that's open, you must wear a mask. Also worth pointing out that if you're, as I've already pointed out, anywhere that's open, wear a mask.
Err on the side of caution, Nick? Thank you so much. That is Nick Trubridge, who's outside Avondale College there. As he said, about 2,500 students having to stay home for 2 weeks in isolation, get 3 tests after one of the people with the Delta strain turns out to be a teacher at that school. It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. Haere aki nei. So is everyone playing by the rules while we will check in with the police? Testing stations have been running hot today with high demand for swabs, particularly in Auckland. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera op Marika Habazi went to check them out.
Downtown Devonport in Level 4, home of the first community case announced by the Ministry. The streets were unsurprisingly quiet under stay-at-home orders like the rest of the country. But the pharmacy the COVID case visited on Monday was open.
So we're here at the Devonport Pharmacy, which is a location of interest that the COVID case visited on 12:15 to 12:30 on Monday the 16th of August. We tried to go inside and ask them why they were open, but we were escorted outside as they said they'd call the police.
We tried to ask them what measures they had taken to deep clean or notify staff and customers about their situation, but were met with this response.
We're under stress, we're also human beings, and you guys making us feel bad. Please go.
On the Ministry's website, staff working at places a COVID case visits must isolate until they get a negative COVID test. A few minutes drive away, we come to a pop-up testing station. Hundreds of locals were queuing up to be tested.
Here at the Narrow Neck pop-up testing station in Woodall Park in Devonport, cars are queued up for at least a kilometre down the road. Most people we've spoken to have said they're facing at least a 2 or 3 hour wait.
Most of them are doing it because they've got a few symptoms and they want to rule out COVID.
A bit of a cold, probably.
So yeah, we're going to just get the whole family tested.
I work in retail down in Devonport Village, and it's a popular little store. So, and I've got my daughter staying with me, and she's at risk.
Because I work out and about in the community a lot. I've had a low-lying cold for a couple of weeks, so just checking the boxes. Yeah.
We've just been exposed to the pharmacy down in Devonport where the test positive guy has been to, so we're just a bit concerned and make sure that we're not.
Yeah, so you visited on a day that the person was there too?
Yes.
I've got a cough, so I've had a cough for a few days now, and because I live really close, I live in Belmont, so I thought there is a chance it could be COVID.
Lara Hopley has been helping with the testing station. She admits they've had some teething issues, but she's got some advice for those wanting to speed things up.
So we've got a system here where we're going to enter the orders directly into the electronic system, which means if the people can bring their NHI, which is a National Health Index number, your doctors will have it. It's sitting on your script. It's probably on one of your pill bottles. So it's 3 alphas, so ABC, and then 4 numbers. And that number is unique to you. And if you can come up with that number, they can enter it directly, and it's a lot faster to get you into the system.
A few hours later and the pharmacy was still open, with no signs to close. For people queuing up here, it's a long wait and some sustenance is required. 800 water bottles and cookies were handed out to people patiently waiting at this station and at nearby Northcote.
You guys want some water?
Yes, please, most lovely.
How many?
4, all right?
Yeah, 4's fine. No.
This pop-up clinic is one of 3 that opened today to add to the permanent ones. People happy to wait for a swab and for peace of mind.
It is 25 minutes past 5, and if you were listening to that, we'll put up the video on our Facebook page. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Police are promising to be out in big numbers for the level 4 lockdown, telling people the rules will be enforced. They made 8 arrests at anti-lockdown protests in several areas of the country. They're also warning they'll be checking people's travel is for essential purposes only. Well, joining me now is the Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa. Good evening, Commissioner. What's your strategy here?
Good evening, Lisa. This time around, we know we're dealing with a different variant and it presents a much higher level of risk. So people can expect us to be more oriented towards enforcement because we know that gatherings, as we've seen in New South Wales, can be a real risk to public safety.
So no warnings this time around, is it?
I'm not saying no warnings. We will adopt an approach according to each situation, and we still will engage and educate where that's appropriate, but where we have people deliberately flaunting the lockdown, we will be moving much faster towards enforcement.
Okay, well, if we can talk about deliberate breaking of the rules, what happened with the protesters today?
We had 3 different protests today, one in Nelson outside a police station. That group dispersed quickly when police staff engaged and no one was arrested. In Tauranga, we had an anti-lockdown protest of about 20 people. We took 4 into custody after they refused to disperse and the rest of the crowd left quietly. And then in Auckland, we had a larger gathering of around 60 to 80 and they were given fair opportunity to move on and didn't. We arrested 4 people and the balance of the crowd dispersed.
So in Nelson, why weren't people arrested? Because you said people who were purposely breaking the rules, which they are because it's a level 4 lockdown, stay at home and they're outside the police station. Why didn't they get arrested?
As I say, it's a case-by-case approach and we will move more quickly to enforcement, but we'll take into account the circumstances. There is an entitlement to protest, but actually when we weigh the risk of protest in this situation, we see that enforcement is required sooner than it has been under previous arrangements. So we'll judge the circumstances. All I'm saying is we will move more quickly to enforcement where there are deliberate breaches.
Are you operating roadblocks this time around?
We are doing a range of things to check the lawfulness of movement that is occurring. So that's our people out there stopping cars on the road. That might be mobile patrols. It might be stopping people at static points. There's no fixed arrangement here. We'll use a variety of tactics.
And what do you expect from people who are on the move? Are they supposed to have some kind of evidence, or how are you judging this?
Look, we're obviously realistic that where you have people providing critical services, some of them have got to get evidence from their employers for this time around. So, we'll exercise a common sense approach, but in essence, people need to be able to demonstrate that their movement is for a critical purpose, be it accessing food or because they're providing an essential service.
Waka Kotahi has said that there were higher than usual traffic volumes on Auckland state highways yesterday, and queues forming going through Johnston's Hill Tunnel. So heading north in the direction of holiday spots. Also, it was busy coming out of Wellington City yesterday. Were people being sort of opportunistic holiday makers last night?
We had a mix of things going. Obviously, people are entitled to travel home where they genuinely live outside of the place that they found themselves when the lockdown started. But unfortunately, we had a small group of people who decided to take the opportunity to go to the batch. We turned around a lot of vehicles at a checkpoint in Coromandel, and it was very disappointing to see people heading towards the place that's been identified as the hotspot.
Do you know how many you turned around, Commissioner?
We turned around approximately 200 vehicles, I believe. We'll have some more statistics tomorrow morning, but certainly there are a lot of vehicles that we turned around.
How would you characterise that kind of behaviour? There was a clear warning, there's a clear order to stay at home, and there they are wombling off to a holiday spot.
Yeah, I mean, look, some people, were playing a game with this and saying, oh, well, I'm lockdown hasn't started yet, it's not yet midnight. And legally, technically, that's correct, but actually what we know is that most people here are abiding by the spirit of the lockdown, which is it's not safe to move because that spreads or risks spreading the virus around. So we need to focus on the fact that most people have done the right thing, and unfortunately we've had a small number who have, taken the risk for everyone else.
Thanks, Commissioner. Appreciate your time. That is the Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa there. The latest COVID cases have rocked the Coromandel Peninsula, where hundreds of people have today been tested, and the community set up its own roadblock. The man who first tested positive for COVID visited the area with his wife over the weekend, and wastewater testing is being done alongside COVID swabs to see if the virus has spread. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Coromandel's Umu Cafe is used to welcoming out-of-towners, but the arrival of COVID has blindsided them.
We're in a state of some shock, but getting through it, trying to make sure that we've got all our T's crossed and I's dotted in terms of what we need to do.
Josie Fraser is the co-owner here. Her 15 staff are all self-isolating or awaiting tests after the Devonport couple visited the cafe multiple times over the weekend.
3 times, yeah. Well, they obviously liked us, which is a really good thing in lots of ways. Somewhat unfortunate that they were sick, but they were a lovely couple who the staff interacted with and had conversations with. The staff knew immediately as soon as they said where they were from that it was this certain couple who they had really enjoyed serving.
Umu is one of 9 locations of interest on the Coromandel Peninsula, where today more than 100 people lined up to get their COVID tests. Local Coromandel Colville Ward Councillor John Morrissey says people are shocked but coping.
It's landed right on our doorstep this time, so that's a bit of a different feeling. It is strange to live in town, and it's a small community, so everybody knows everybody, and those places that have been affected, there's usually a connection to them.
Despite the risk of the virus being in the rohi, it would appear some visitors were still keen to take their chances, prompting a roadblock to be set up at Manaia, just south of Coromandel town. Local Dawn Richards says the community stepped up to make sure no pressure was put on local services.
It was just to protect our own, stop the flow of traffic mainly that we all know comes from Auckland to all over the place, really. We just have kaumātua families that are all worried, and we have enough to worry about, so we don't need any more people coming in and settling in.
Police say while they understand smaller and more isolated communities feel more vulnerable to COVID-19, there should be no need for community checkpoints. Meanwhile, Coromandel's own Mayor, Sandra Gowdy, yesterday told Checkpoint that scanning is hit and miss for her and she relies on her credit card to track where she's been. That's drawn widespread criticism, and her fellow councillor, Gary Gottlieb, says it's embarrassed her colleagues.
I was, as a councillor, quite shocked to hear those comments. That's not leadership we need in this sort of situation we have. And I've had so many people contact me about this as a councillor, and I'm quite ashamed she's made those comments.
Sandra Gowdy today said she was too relaxed about her own complacency with scanning, but there was no question she'd be using it now. While there's been a strong turnout for testing today, people are being warned it will take some time. Te Korawai Hauora or Hauraki is a rural iwi-based health provider in the area. Chief Executive Rihanna Manuel told 9 to Noon it's a process.
We're encouraging people not to all come at once. Come as you can, and we're here all day. And we're going to be here for a few days, so we don't want people rushing in all at once.
In addition to the COVID swabs, wastewater testing is also being set up across the peninsula, with the first results expected later in the week.
And police say they turned around about 200 cars trying to enter Coromandel. Kia ora e te iwi e haere nei e a Checkpoint. The COVID outbreak in New South Wales worsens again. We cross live to Sydney for the latest. Air New Zealand's boss on the Mercy mission to get people back to their hometowns, and schools back around the kitchen table. So we check in on how parents have been coping. Homai o whakaaro, we'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Nei Sarah Mina Pita Kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ headlines, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government says there have been several new cases of COVID-19 in the community that are just awaiting confirmation. This afternoon, it confirmed 7 community cases, all linked to the initial person, a 58-year-old man from Devonport. But the COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, told Checkpoint there were now new cases and likely to be more overnight. Genomic testing has shown the initial case had the same Delta variant discovered in Sydney, but he is likely not the source. Chris Hipkins says the government is asking health authorities in Australia to help determine how the virus managed to get to New Zealand. The police say they will be out in force over the next few days, following a number of arrests at anti-lockdown protests earlier today. 4 people, including former Public Party leader Billy Te Kahika, were arrested in Auckland, while 4 others were arrested at protests in Nelson and Tauranga. The Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa, has told the program that the Delta variant brings new risks and people can expect tougher enforcement. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says while the nationwide vaccination program will recommence tomorrow, there may be some changes. The program was paused following the announcement of the lockdown to give district health boards time to implement contingency plans. Jacinda Ardern says some centres may not be able to accommodate as many bookings under the lockdown conditions. She says anyone who needs to have their booking rescheduled will be contacted directly. And finally, the hospitality industry is counting the potential cost from the snap lockdown through mass cancellations and wasted food. The Chief Executive of Hospitality New Zealand, Julie White, says the lockdown has come at a particularly bad time for the accommodation and restaurant sectors, with several major events on. Julie White says the hospitality sector supports the level 4 restrictions because while it does not want to see New Zealand replicate the situation in New South Wales, which is now in its 9th week of lockdown. Those are your headlines. The time is now 23 minutes to 6.
Nā mihi Sarah, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa I nai nei, ko Giles Beckford, who's joining us live from our Wellington studio. Giles, the lockdown, right? Just before the Reserve Bank was supposed to make its announcement, has it changed its thinking as a consequence?
Most definitely it has. I spoke to Adrian Orr, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, not so long ago. And he made it quite clear to me that but for the lockdown, in all likelihood, we would have been looking at a cash rate up at 0.5%, a quarter of a percentage point increase. It was a coin toss, as they were saying last night, when one case came to light. But when we wake up this morning to find that there were further cases and we're now getting a wider spread, really the die was cast. They've erred on the side of caution. I don't think they're particularly wild about it, and reading through their commentary and the conversation I had with Adrian Orr, quite clearly the path is still for the cash rate to be increased. Inflation pressures are nagging away at them. The headline rate is above 3%. A strong labour market, and it's reached that level where the Reserve Bank says it's sort of reached its mandate. It's fulfilled its mandate of sustainable full employment. With that in tow, then the two main things, two preconditions really for rate rises have been fulfilled. Adrian Orr's intimating to me, and their forward track certainly implies one rate rise before the end of the year, probably two. Adrian Orr has more or less said that's on the cards, all things being equal, with the cash rate then rising through to about 2% over the next couple of years. The big question mark, of course, is the lockdown and how long that goes on for, how deep it becomes. Certainly the Reserve Bank is willing to wear it for the time being, but even if it were to be for some time, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't want to take some action before the end of the year.
Now, Giles, just before we move on to the markets, we've got some breaking news here. Now, the COVID response minister told the program that there are more confirmed cases of the Delta strain in the community. The Prime Minister's office has confirmed that there are 3 new cases of COVID-19 in the community, and more information will be released about those cases tomorrow at 1. Now, Giles, the markets, I'm sure they're watching what's going on with interest, and what do the numbers tell us today?
Well, clearly that sort of uncertainty and drip feeding of more cases coming out is just a very sort of uncertainty which is going to keep the Reserve Bank on edge, and also financial markets. They had factored in there was quite a sharp fall in the New Zealand dollar last night when the first COVID case in the lockdown was announced. The New Zealand dollar, it initially fell quite sharply against the US dollar when the RBNZ decision came out. Went down to below 69 cents. It's rebounded and recovered all lost ground. It's currently sitting around 69.3 US cents, 95.4 Australian. The share market, of course, quite happy with this because low interest rates is usually good for share markets, equities in general. So it's regained all of yesterday's lost ground and then some, up 84 points for the top 50 index. That's about 0.2% at 12,719.
Kia ora rā, Giles. That is Giles Beckford, our business editor. And just to confirm, if you're only just joining us, the Prime Minister's office has confirmed that there are 3 new cases of COVID-19 in the community. That brings us to a total of 10 so far. More information about those cases will be provided tomorrow at the 1 o'clock update. COVID's grip on New South Wales is getting stronger with a record 633 daily cases and 3 deaths. There's growing frustration over the increasing cases and why tougher restrictions aren't being put in place. World Watch's Paulina Lau reports.
A new state record of COVID cases and a new warning.
According to the data we have, every person who has the virus is spreading it to at least more than one person. Now, for us to know that we've reached our peak, that can't continue. So what the data is telling us in the last few days is that we haven't seen the worst of it.
New South Wales recorded 633 locally acquired cases overnight and another 3 COVID-related deaths. The Greater Sydney area has been in lockdown since June, but cases continue to escalate. That's prompting questions over why the New South Wales government isn't willing to enforce a statewide lockdown. State Premier Gladys Berejiklian being grilled on what it's going to take.
We rely on the advice of our health experts. We know that our lockdown is extremely harsh and extremely strict.
But not everyone agrees. As things got heated, Ms Berejiklian pointed to rule breakers, with police catching hundreds of people in one day leaving their homes.
We have had and continue to have the right settings in place, but unfortunately too many people continue to do the wrong thing.
So the settings are right, aren't they?
Excuse me, it's not your press conference. There's a lot of other journalists here as well.
Comparisons are being drawn with Victoria, the state recording significantly lower daily cases. Restrictions are tougher with a curfew in Melbourne.
We know the settings we have in place are some of the harshest that Australia has ever seen.
But not the harshest.
However, we also know that unfortunately it only takes a small number of people to do the wrong thing to cause this amount of spread.
Why is Victoria 20 a day and your numbers are going up?
The Premier repeating the notion it's up to every citizen to do the right thing. It's reported federal health officials want a stricter lockdown and that the state's Chief Health Officer, Dr Kerry Chant, agrees and has made this known. Dr Chant faced questions over why her advice isn't being taken.
We have a shared vision, which is high vaccination coverage and very low levels of community transmission. I can't restate that. I can't comment any further than say the Premier, in all my discussions with her, is absolutely committed to increasing vaccine coverage and getting low community transmission.
Dr Chant says discussions are ongoing about more restrictions but gave no further detail. Prime Minister Scott Morrison describes the figures from New South Wales as disheartening.
After hearing that news in New South Wales today, I know that once again your hearts would have sunk for a moment, and perhaps longer. But let's lift them up again because we are going to get through this and we are going to beat this. We're never going to give up in our battle against COVID in this country.
Mr Morrison says Australia is on the verge of reaching a milestone where 1 in every 2 people eligible for the vaccine have had 1 dose.
Now, for more on this, I'm joined by 9 News reporter Charles Croucher, who's in Sydney. Charles, that was a hell of an awkward press conference. Has the State Premier and her Principal Health Advisor here fallen out?
We're getting pretty good at these awkward press conferences, aren't we? We're getting a lot of practice at them. Look, it's clear that this is putting strain on the relationship between Gladys Berejiklian and Kerry Chant. I think the idea that the Chief Health Officer's advice has been ignored is a stretch. Certainly it has been considered. But there are limited amounts more that the New South Wales government can do. And what we continue to see is these cases are being transmitted in homes, first and foremost, and only then, and quite a long distance then, sometimes in workplaces. In terms of travel restrictions and the house restrictions, they're pretty harsh at the moment. We can't leave 5-kilometre radius. You know, it's not a lockdown like New Zealand has seen, but on the same note, this is about as harsh as it gets in Australia, with the exception of a curfew. And what our officials are finding is that there's not a lot of transmission at night time. It's not like a curfew would instantly solve the problem. So at one stage, the Premier said, I just want everybody to care, which is a pretty grim prospect. It's the equivalent of, being down by 40 in a rugby match and screaming, "Look at the badge" or "Look at your jersey." It's suggesting that we're trying our hardest, but there's not much happening.
But not everybody's trying hard, are they, Charles? There's some rule breakers out there. So are they just, ignoring them, and are they getting pinged and pinged hard?
Well, certainly the fines are large. They're talking about sort of $5,000 on-the-spot fines if you're ignoring mask warnings or ignoring stay-at-home warnings or deliberately breaking the rules. There are large families this is involving. Look at the southwest and the west of Sydney. It's large multicultural families that have been driving this. There certainly are people breaking the rules. This isn't the case of 2 or 3 people going for a run together, though. This is large groups that are used to gathering as families and used to gathering in places. The other problem is there's a lot of people paid out there that are paid on a per hour basis. They're paid to work. Some would be in jobs that aren't run through normal circumstances, and therefore they just can't afford not to go to work. And we know the problem with Sydney's rental market. So there's a lot of factors leading into this. I know I'm giving what sounds like excuses and no solutions. And I think the problem for Gladys Berejiklian and the entire New South Wales health team is that this Delta strain has proven in every country in the world, if you do not get it early, like Queensland has done here, like we're really hoping that you have done in New Zealand, then it's horribly hard to drag back or claw back in the way that Victoria did with the Alpha strain last year. This is a whole different kettle of fish, and everything about that press conference today said to me that it's really minimising damage now for New South Wales, keeping enough beds in hospitals to handle the ICU and hoping the vaccination rate gets us out of trouble at some stage this year.
So, 633 cases today, a pandemic high. How far has it actually spread within New South Wales now?
This is the big problem. There is a big cluster in Western New South Wales, in small communities, in many cases Indigenous communities, and in lots of cases they are under-resourced when it comes to healthcare. So what we now have is almost a whole of the West approach, where big cities, for regional cities, 60 and 70,000 people, have had to cancel all kinds of non-elective and elective surgery at their hospitals, simply to free up nurses in many cases, and also surgeons and beds, so that if this outbreak continues and if the rate of hospitalisation amongst the unvaccinated continues, that we don't have a shortage of beds. I suspect in the next few days, possibly a few weeks, there will be the SOS call go out to other states to start providing medical staff like we saw in Melbourne last year, because the pressure that's being put on the particularly emergency services staff and particularly the ICU nurses is huge, and that will be the problem moving forward, because with all these cases is going to come more hospitalisations, and that means more beds, and sadly it means more people in intensive care, and inevitably more people are going to die. And that's the really grim situation facing New South Wales.
Certainly is. Thanks for the update, Charles. That's Charles Croucher, who is the 9 News reporter in Sydney. It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He Muriaki nā Pitipiti kōrero after the news at 6, how businesses are dealing with a return to lockdown. Air New Zealand is racing to get 50,000 people home from around the country inside the 48-hour government deadline. Auckland and the Coromandel is at lockdown level 4 for at least 7 days as authorities rush to contain this highly contagious Delta cluster. For the rest of the country, it's at least 3 days in lockdown. Now, people have until midnight tomorrow to return to the place that they normally stay. Air New Zealand has put more flights and bigger planes on the high-demand route out of Queenstown, but boss Greg Foran reckons it's still a tough ask to meet that deadline.
Actually, over the 48-hour period, so let's take Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to do about 800 flights and move sort of circa about 50,000 people back to where they need to get to. We've had a reasonable amount of no-shows. It varies by port. It's a bit heavier in sort of Auckland and Wellington. In Queenstown, however, we've got, the best part of a couple of thousand people to get home today and tomorrow. And then we'd had booked about another 4,000 over Friday, Saturday and Sunday. So we obviously need to bring those people forward and try and get them back before Friday. So lots of people. We're putting on additional flights into Queenstown. We've put 3 more flights on there, plus we've upgraded all of our A320s to A321s, which are the planes that we use to fly the Tasman, and they've got about an extra 40-plus seats on them. So we're doing what we can there, and the network is going reasonably well.
Okay, so this is all prompted by a community outbreak, and it is the Delta strain. What we have found out today is it is a strain that is linked to New South Wales. We don't know exactly how it jumped the ditch, but odds on your crew may have flown this back. So, have you been given any instructions? Is there anything in particular happening around staff who may have worked on those flights recently?
Well, look, I think that's a fair amount of speculation. I don't know anything more about it than what you do at the moment. What I can tell you is that we follow our protocols pretty tightly and have been doing this for a while. And we'll just have to wait and see how it has got from potentially New South Wales to New Zealand. But, we're pretty strict on protocols, good use of PPE. We're even enhancing that at the moment because we know Delta is much more difficult. But
so no proactive additional tests of staff who may have worked on those routes right now?
We haven't done any additional testing, but they do regularly get tested, and not just on those Australian routes, but right around the country. So when they're back, they're into self-isolation and are tested after a couple of days.
So with a 7-day lockdown in Auckland, 3 days for the rest of the country, and really, well, it could extend longer, we don't know yet. What does that mean for your business and the flight schedule?
Well, of course, what's going to happen on Friday is there's actually going to be very, very few planes in the air, because the only ones that will be flying domestically will be those carrying essential workers. So, there'll be a flight from Auckland to Wellington and a couple from Auckland to Christchurch, Christchurch to Wellington, Nelson to Wellington, Christchurch to Dunedin, and that will be about it in terms of main jets. We'll have to see what happens in terms of the rest of the country, i.e., excluding Auckland and Coromandel, as to whether we go down to level 2 or level 3. Level 2 will be a lot more flying than level 3. And so we've got really little to no domestic business. Obviously, almost nothing happening across the Tasman of significance. Rarotonga has gone into a pause for a period of time, and international is effectively cargo, with the odd repatriation associated with it. So, look, we're just a small part of what we were.
What are you down to, Greg? What are you down to? If you were back up to what capacity, what does this now reduce you back down to?
I'm guessing we're probably flying at it by Friday. I'm guessing, Lisa, maybe something like about 10%.
That's pretty miserable, isn't it?
Well, it is what it is, and we knew that this potentially could happen, and, we've got to get through this like we have in the past and get out the other side. And we do know that people do want to travel. They do want to travel domestically. They do want to get back across the Tasman. So we've just got to be patient and work through this, and then we'll get up and running.
Are you going to be asking for the wage subsidy?
We certainly will be. So the team are working on that already, and we'll need every bit of that.
How many workers do you think you'll be claiming for?
Well, because of the impact that we've got on our business, we'll be able to go for the full amount of the subsidy. But as I shared previously, that subsidy is helpful, but it doesn't cover the high costs that are associated with running an airline. So we'll just deal with this as it comes along.
Greg, if we can just go back to Queenstown for a moment. So you've got really high demand there. You're putting on bigger planes. The government's given a 48-hour window for people to get home, right, from the commencement of the lockdown. Can you get them all home in that period? Can you meet that deadline?
Well, we're doing our best, and we'll have to see how that plays out over the next few hours. And, we'll look at alternatives, and some of those alternatives could be that, maybe we've got to get to people to Invercargill and then get them back from Invercargill or whatever. So that's a piece of work that's underway at the moment, and we'll see where that takes us.
Greg, are you talking to the government about whether there's any flexibility in that, given your schedule?
We are having some quiet conversations to see whether there is any opportunity. We have no, feedback on that at the moment. And as I said, we're trying to look also at alternatives. So, this is something which is moving quite quickly, Lisa, and we'll just work through it sensibly over the next few hours and see where that takes us.
And that's Greg Foran, and more than 80% of Air New Zealand staff are vaccinated. Rain in the capital helped encourage many Wellingtonians to embrace lockdown today. It's also hit pause on the capital's major foodie event, Wellington on a Plate. Jake McKee has more.
At first light this morning, Wellington was a ghost town. Walking down Lambton Quay, chippering birds could be heard loudly in the trees. No vehicles or people around to drown them out. And rubbish trucks and buses pretty much outnumbered pedestrians. But from mid-morning, there was a small but steady dribble of people making their way around. Some were out exercising and some were essential workers, but most were getting necessities to accommodate a life in lockdown.
I am up here on holiday. I fly home tomorrow, so I needed some food.
Out and about just to get some medicine for my sick family. Had I known we're going to be in lockdown, I would have done it probably earlier, but I guess when you need medicine, you sort of need medicine.
I'm a visitor in Wellington and I'm heading back to Auckland very soon. I've managed to secure a flight back within the 48 hours and I'm just out to get some cash from an ATM.
There was also Robert Erskine and his wife, an Australian couple who'd fled to New Zealand to avoid lockdowns there. They were out for their daily exercise, but there was another reason too.
I've got cold symptoms. I'm going for a COVID test.
On the CBD fringe, there were lines coming north and south as people queued in their cars on Taranaki Street to get tested for COVID-19. Many in the line had symptoms, and a lot of them admitted they probably should have been tested sooner. Amanda Brown, who's had a sore throat for 3 days, was one of them.
Well, I hadn't thought of it actually until we're in lockdown, and I thought, oh my goodness, I better get tested.
With the brakes pulled on Wellington on a plate, Festival Chief Executive Sarah Meikle says it's a big blow for restaurants.
Bearing in mind that we are at the start of the Burger Wellington portion of Visa Wellington on a plate, which is notoriously very well attended, I think it's safe to say that there is large volumes of stock in people's fridges worth a lot of money.
But there's also the issue of helping people out in the city who struggle to put food on their own plates at all. Wellington City Missioner Murray Edridge says they've closed their own supermarket, a project it runs with New World. He says there hasn't been a spike in demand yet.
I think it's probably too early in lockdown for people to have identified needs, because it's just like a normal Wednesday at the moment for most people, except that nobody's out on the streets. So it's very quiet.
Kahungunu Ki Pōneke Community Services is also working to provide for the city's most vulnerable. It's delivering food and hygiene passes today after spending the night checking on those at emergency housing and other facilities. Some think Wellingtonians have become a bit COVID complacent, but others were more optimistic about lockdown.
Better to keep everyone safe, do what's needed, just get it done.
Yeah, we just got to get our heads down. It's not feeling great, but I'm English, so it could be a lot worse.
For Wellington and the rest of the country outside Auckland and Coromandel, Level 4 is in place until at least midnight Friday.
Now, if you're just joining us, the number of positive cases is up to 10.
Ahia Himari, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. The Prime Minister's office has confirmed there are 3 new cases of COVID-19 in the community. The total number of infections linked to the Auckland outbreak is now 10. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister says more information about the cases will be provided tomorrow. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint people should expect health officials will identify more cases overnight. The government isn't ruling out an MIQ leak or an Australian returnee jumping state borders before flying home as the index case of the latest COVID-19 outbreak. Mr Hipkins says a number of people who've returned from New South Wales have tested positive for COVID-19 in managed isolation facilities. He says it's also possible the latest outbreak could be traced back to an Australian returnee jumping state borders before coming home.
So I certainly wouldn't discount the possibility that somehow it's escaped from the MIQ. There's also the possibility that someone has somehow jumped the border, if you like, by travelling from New South Wales to another Australian state and then flying back without being detected.
Chris Hipkins conceded the outbreak is a result of a border breach. He says this is disappointing as the government has put systems in place to prevent this from happening. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says until more information is known, all regions of the country need to be in Alert Level 4 together. Currently, there are no confirmed community cases or locations of interest in the South Island. However, Ms Ardern says because the exact source is yet to be pinpointed, she cannot guarantee the South Island is not implicated. Jacinda Ardern says people who have been to locations of interest may also be located in the South Island. Locals who set up a roadblock on Coromandel Peninsula say they were protecting their community from out-of-towners. The checkpoint was put in place at Manaia, just south of Coromandel town, where a man who tested positive for COVID had spent the weekend. Dawn Richards says people have been checking who is coming into the community to avoid extra pressure on local services.
It was just to protect our own, stop the flow of traffic mainly that we all know comes from Auckland to all over the place, really. We just have kaumātua families that are all worried, and we have enough to worry about, so we don't need any more people coming in and settling in.
Police say while smaller communities can feel more vulnerable to COVID-19, there should be no need for community checkpoints. There is anxiety among some Auckland City Hospital staff because not every person who worked in the same ward as a COVID-positive nurse needs to isolate and be tested. Everyone who worked the same shifts as the 21-year-old fully vaccinated nurse in Ward 65 has to stay home and get tested. But many other staff come and go from the ward as part of their job. The hospital is telling them to keep coming to work but to be on the lookout for symptoms. The nurses' organisation's Keri Nuku has said she has heard from one person in that position today.
I know that she was a little bit uncertain about whether or not that was the right course of action. However, she was reassured by her managers that they've followed the guidelines that have been approved by the Ministry of Health.
Other hospital staff have also told Radio New Zealand they're worried. The Pfizer vaccine rollout will recommence from tomorrow morning. More than 55,000 doses of the vaccine were administered yesterday, a new record. However, the program was paused following the announcement of the lockdown to give district health boards time to implement contingency plans. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the nationwide vaccination program will resume tomorrow.
This will look a bit different though. Vaccination sites will be operating under Alert Level 4 conditions. And that means in some cases, they won't necessarily have as many people coming through as they may have prior.
Jacinda Ardern says those affected by a rescheduling of their booking will be contacted. Otherwise, people should still get their vaccine as scheduled. United States President Joe Biden's approval rating has plunged following the botched US military withdrawal from Afghanistan. A new survey shows the president lost 7 percentage points in just 72 hours. Our correspondent Simon Marks reports.
The Reuters Ipsos survey makes depressing reading for the White House. Just 46% of voters now approve of the job President Biden is doing. That is down from 53% only last Friday. And it's clear the president's handling of the crisis in Afghanistan is the cause. The White House hopes by focusing on the reasons for the troop withdrawal, the president can turn those numbers around. But the poll suggests many Americans are blaming him for the disaster unfolding in Kabul.
Moving into sport now, the Level 4 lockdown will not stop the New Zealand Paralympic team leaving for Tokyo over the next few days. Some of the team have already arrived in Tokyo, while some are heading to Japan from other countries. Felicity Reid reports.
There are 20 athletes and 20 support staff still in New Zealand and set to leave over the next few days. Paralympics New Zealand has been working with Sport New Zealand to get the team out of the country safely and in accordance to Alert Level 4 guidelines. Prior to leaving, the team was required to follow a 14-day health monitoring program and return 3 negative COVID tests. All team members will also be COVID tested on arrival into Japan and have to undergo daily tests while in Tokyo. The Paralympic competition starts next Wednesday.
Sean Johnson has been granted an early release by NRL club Cronulla to return to Auckland after securing a place in managed isolation for himself and his family. Australian media reports suggest it will cost Johnson $60,000 as he'll forgo the final month of his contract. He wasn't going to play again this season after suffering a hamstring injury a month ago. In June, he signed a 2-year contract to return to the Warriors, the club he left in 2018. And finally, Afghanistan's first female Paralympian Zaki Kudadi is in hiding after failing to leave Kabul before the Taliban took over the country. Kudadi has sent a plea to the team's London-based chef de mission to try and help her and a fellow team member get to Tokyo. And that is your sport and news.
Tonight on Nights, Dan Slevin is back in the movies. Just in time for another Level 4 lockdown. Brian Roper has an eco-socialist response to the latest IPCC report on climate change. in our country's latest attempts to meet its side of the bargain. And then there's Claire Hilton, historian and residence at the Royal College of Psychiatrists in London, with a history of shrinks, on nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
RNZ National, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. Now an official COVID-19 update. All of New Zealand is at COVID-19 alert level 4. The alert level will be reviewed after 3 days for all areas except Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, which is likely to remain at level 4 for an initial period of 7 days. Stay home where possible and follow the alert level 4 guidelines. This will stop the spread of COVID-19 and save lives. Everyone is asked to wear a mask and keep a 2-metre distance from others whenever you leave your home. If you are sick, call your doctor or Healthline on 0800 358 5453 for advice about getting tested. Keep scanning QR codes whenever you leave your home and practice good hygiene. Wash your hands often. Services including supermarkets, pharmacies, clinics and petrol stations will stay open at alert level 4. Face coverings are mandatory for all people, both employees and customers at businesses and services operating at alert level 4 that involve customer contact. For more information, go to covid19.govt.nz. And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāpare Thursday. For Northland to Manawatu, including Taihape and Taumaranui, showers today, some thundery with hail and snow lowering to 1,000 metres. Partly cloudy with isolated showers tomorrow. For Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, showers with possible thunderstorms and hail clearing to fine overnight. Some cloud returning tomorrow afternoon. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers possibly thundery clearing overnight and becoming fine. For Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Nelson, scattered showers clearing this evening, generally fine tomorrow. For Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine today, apart from showers in Fiordland, scattered rain tomorrow and possible thunderstorms in Fiordland. For Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, fine, but cloud increasing in Otago tomorrow with evening showers. For Clutha and Southland, partly cloudy with scattered showers near the coast, spreading elsewhere for a time tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, showers, possibly thundery, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. That concludes your short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāpare Thursday. The time is 9 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā, Sarah. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. We have more details to hand of locations of interest for this cluster, and a number of new ones have gone up on the site, so do check it out. But some of the new locations are St Pierre's Sushi in Auckland CBD, Avondale College, Glass Corp Limited in Albany, Unique Hardware in Rosedale, also the BP in Northcote on Northcote Road, and Remawera Exchange, which is in Dilworth Avenue. As I say, they're at various dates and times, so for the exact details, go onto the Ministry of Health website under the locations of interest. They are adding more locations all the time. New Zealand's COVID-19 outbreak has grown to 10 and the Prime Minister has warned there will be more. The Prime Minister's also announced that from midnight tonight it will be mandatory to wear a mask when visiting essential services such as supermarkets, pharmacies and service stations. The vaccination program will also restart from 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, but in a socially distanced fashion. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
New Zealand is new to the threat of Delta, one of the last countries to be hit by the most infectious variant of COVID-19. We were told to assume yesterday's mystery case was that Delta strain. Today brought confirmation.
I know Delta is making people feel anxious and more afraid. And it is true that we will see more cases. But we can get on top of this, just like we have every other time, if we do it together.
New Zealanders know the drill. They have been here before. Go home, stay home. But this time the threat is greater and the potential spread wider. Overnight, the size of the outbreak jumped from 1 to 5 and then again to 7 at the 1 o'clock media conference. Even in the hours since then, the number has grown to 10. Modelling seen by Dr. Ashley Bloomfield suggests the true number could be much higher.
We could expect somewhere between already 50 and 120 cases. The key thing, of course, is finding those cases as quickly as possible.
The Health Ministry has revealed details of 7 of the positive cases, the initial Devonport man and his 20-year-old workmate. All 3 of the workmate's flatmates have it too, as well as 2 other friends.
Most of the cases identified so far are in their 20s. They've been out and about a lot, and I'm flagging that there will be large numbers of locations of interest.
Already, the locations include multiple central Auckland bars and venues across the evening of Friday into the early hours of Saturday morning, and a church in Freeman's Bay on Sunday. The growing list can be found on the Health Ministry's website. It gets worse. One of the individuals is a nurse at Auckland Hospital. She was fully vaccinated but worked 4 shifts while potentially infectious. Another is a teacher at Avondale College, the 3rd largest secondary school in the country with some 2,800 students. All students and staff have been deemed close contacts, told to get a test and isolate for 14 days. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says people must follow the rules.
We very unfortunately need only to look at New South Wales, who today have reported 633 cases. 92 were active in the community while infected.
The Australian state of New South Wales paints a sobering picture, and genome testing has confirmed the strain here is the same as the strain circulating there. In other words,
our case has originated in Australia. And now the job we have is to work through how and when it got here.
Authorities have several working theories. Top of the list is the Jet Park quarantine facility. There are 3 people there currently who arrived from Sydney with the virus this month. Genome results from their cases are expected later tonight and could reveal whether the cases are connected. If not, the net will be cast wider to cover everyone who arrived before or just after the Trans-Tasman bubble popped. Remember, Kiwis had a week to return home, but those coming from New South Wales still had to go into managed isolation.
We are drawing down a list of all travellers from Australia into New Zealand through that period in preparation to contact them again should we find that this case is not linked to the current cases that we have at our managed isolation facilities.
For now, it remains a mystery how the virus crossed the ditch. The answer could help authorities decide whether the lockdown restrictions go beyond that initial 3 days. In the meantime, New Zealanders are urged to get tested if they have symptoms and again, stay home.
In news to hand, AUT has confirmed that one of its students is one of the COVID-19 positive cases reported today. In a letter to people affected by this, they say that the student was at a social institutions lecture in WG 403 at the city campus between 11:30 and 1 o'clock yesterday and is believed to have been infectious at the time. AUT has identified that there were 84 other people in attendance at that lecture with the person who is infected and is believed to have been infectious at the time. And they say while this is not yet a complete picture, we are working closely with the Auckland Public Health Service and more information will be provided as soon as it comes to hand. You will be contacted if you are identified as a close contact and provided with information about isolating and getting tested. More on cases and contacts and what to do is on the Auckland Regional Health Public Health Service website on their COVID-19 page. So go on there if you are concerned about it. That is confirmation that one of the cases confirmed today with the Delta strain of COVID is an AUT student. The doors have slammed shut at tens of thousands of businesses with the country now in level 4 lockdown. Once again, the wage subsidy will be on offer to employers, which have a 40% drop in revenue, with applications opening on Friday. The Employers and Manufacturers Association represents about 7,500 businesses. Its CEO, Brett O'Reilly, joins me now. Brett, not an unfamiliar situation, but what does it mean for businesses this time?
Well, definitely not good news, Lisa. Good evening. It's been a pretty tough day, 24 hours for businesses as they've come to grips with the announcement. Unfortunately, after a lot of workers had gone home yesterday, which wasn't ideal, and probably got us off to a not great start. and obviously now starting to understand how business can operate at alert level 4, while many of the principles are the same as last year. Some are slightly different. And obviously for our members who are in Auckland and Coromandel, trying to understand what that border is going to look like in a few days' time, when at the moment the rest of this region is going to come out of 4, and trying to understand how they'll operate in that is consuming a lot of time.
Couple of things in there, Brett. Let's start with the timing of the announcement yesterday. How did that complicate things for business?
Well, we started to hear mid-afternoon yesterday that about the case, and to actually announce what was happening after 6 o'clock. Clearly, people. Out of my offices in Grafton, I was looking at the motorway, and it was chocker in both directions. So people were heading home, but businesses need to plan, and so. For restaurants, for example, that had brought in stock for, thinking they'd be open under normal circumstances, gives you very little time to do anything about that, very little time to do planning with staff. So it would have been much more ideal if an announcement could have been made mid-afternoon, just so people could have planned, and knowing that they were going to be having to work from home. They could have taken, appropriate equipment home to be able to do that. And I know in the case with our own staff, we had to say to them, look, assume the worst, assume it's going to be level 4, and go home, on the basis that you won't be back at work tomorrow. So not ideal, and why we couldn't have sent a message out to businesses earlier, so at least they could have prepared rather than waiting for an announcement on television, is something that we'll take up with the government.
Okay, so the next thing, as you have identified, at the moment we're all in level 4 throughout the entire country. There's potentially a scenario where Auckland and Coromandel stays in this position for 7 days and the rest of the country is only there for 3. How does that complicate things for your members in terms of movement of staff and movement of product?
Well, we know that any time we've closed the border in the past with Auckland, as we've been in and out of alerts, that's been problematical. Now we're going to have 2 regions. Does that mean that the area between Coromandel and Auckland is not going to be in level 4, and how are we actually going to manage that? So that'll be an interesting test for us. And so we'll be starting some discussions tomorrow around that. Of course, all of this supposes that the situation doesn't change, which it might. We had the interesting situation today where freight was able to freely move around, but no one had quite thought through who's going to be out of business to unpack the freight when it arrives and receive it. So there was some adjustments made around that. So, there are a lot of moving parts in this whole situation, and, we're just trying to, get clarification. This is not the first time we've been involved, obviously, with an alert level, not the first time we've been involved with some of these issues, but a little bit of the knowledge that we'd picked up last year seems to have been lost, and so a bit of today has been getting both people in the public sector and people in the business community up to speed again with how this is going to work.
Brett, about 7,500 members you've got. The wage subsidy and the resurgence payments are going to be available, and the wage subsidy's been bumped up a little bit, $600 a week for a full-time worker, $359 for a part-time employee. Are you getting a feel for how much draw there is going to be on this financial assistance from the government?
Probably a bit early to tell, Lisa, but definitely lots of interest in it. We had almost 600 calls into our COVID-19 helpline today and about 150 into our advice line, and they were mainly about the wage subsidy and how that's going to work. I think, it's a busy time of the year for business in general, so I think there will be a lot of call on that. And of course, the difficulty with the subsidy is that it's looking backwards rather than looking forwards. And quite often, the impact on businesses is not actually felt till a little bit further down the track. So we're going to be having a chat to government about that tomorrow, just to make sure that we're really looking at the real impact that it has on business. I mean, of course, as you rightly said, it's been based on the way it's been calculated before. But sometimes the impact doesn't come till a little bit further down the track. But I think to answer your question, there will be a lot of businesses looking at taking up the subsidy, and we are obviously keenly waiting till Friday when they can apply for it.
Good to talk to you, Brett. That's Brett O'Reilly, who is the CEO for the Employers and Manufacturers Association. South Island businesses are standing behind the lockdown, saying it's gutting but a necessary decision. Tess Brunton reports.
The lockdown started just after South Island ski fields received their best snow dump of the year. Looking at the snow-capped mountains, NZ Ski Chief Executive Paul Anderson says Coronet Peak and the Remarkables have 30 centimetres of fresh powder, while Mount Hutt received 40. He's gutted about the lockdown, but says the call needed to be made.
The storm that's just rolled through has dropped the best snow we've had all season on the mountains, and we've had a really solid period post-school holidays, so we know that a lot of people were prepared to travel and come and visit Queenstown and Westland. So, yeah, we're gutted, but we understand the risks with this Delta strain. We're going to do what we can to get on top of it.
Paul Anderson is hopeful a short, sharp lockdown will be enough, but he understands why the government is taking a cautious approach and locking the South Island down too.
The Delta strain has been shown to be very infectious. There are a lot of people travelling around New Zealand, so there is a strong possibility that the strain could have made it to the South Island. And with very low vaccination rate, the only defence is to go to a big lockdown. So I think the answer is really to get going with the vaccination program and get us all vaccinated so we can operate a little bit more normally, even with COVID in our midst.
iFly Queenstown owner Matt Wong was expecting the lockdown news.
Certainly for us, we'll be hurting quite a bit over the next couple of weeks. We know that obviously lockdown will have no trade at all. We still have overheads going out, and we still want to support our staff. That's a priority for us right now, is making sure we look after our people. It will have a flow-on effect. We know Auckland is going to be locked down for another 7, and that's it's a very large part of our market.
Matt Wong's preparing for a hard slog if visitors, particularly Aucklanders, are cut off for weeks. But he says the national lockdown is the right call.
Part of the reason is Queenstown is a gateway, I guess, for Auckland and a lot of the big cities in New Zealand, and we have a bit of a transient population with people coming in and out all the time. So there has been a lot of movement in the last week or two, and certainly with school holidays, we've had a lot of Aucklanders and North Islanders coming through to the South Island. So in order to capture it and make sure that we do a good job with it and it doesn't turn into a New South Wales sort of incident, it is the right move to do.
Over on the west coast in Reefton, Dawson's hotel co-owner Helen McKenzie spent the morning tidying up the hotel and fielding cancellations.
Most of them are just saying they're just putting their travel plans on hold until they know what's going to happen. I don't think any of us think this is only going to last for 3 days. We won't go back down to level 1. We'll go into 2 or 3, and at 3 we can't open anyway, and at 2 is obviously a lot more work and a lot more cost to keep it operating.
Christchurch Airport was busy today, with people returning home or on essential travel. Most people RNZ spoke to agreed with the lockdown decision, but not all.
It's entirely appropriate and it's good to be home.
Just for the first 3 days, yes, until we work out what's going on. I think it's essential because of the type it is.
I think it's probably the best thing to be doing at the moment, yeah. I think everyone's pretty disappointed. The government had one job to do and I don't think they did it.
The lockdown's too quick. I could agree with Auckland and Coromandel, but for all areas down here, they need to give us another 24 hours notice.
Happy to go hard and early. I agree with what the government's doing because already we're seeing extra cases today, and I think if we lock down sooner, hopefully it'll be for shorter.
Businesses say they'll be glued to the daily COVID updates, hoping for better news.
It's back to home for hundreds of thousands of school children across Aotearoa today with the return of level 4. Tom Kitchen has more.
For 6-year-old Isla Arkerson-Nelson, there was one way she was keeping busy today.
I'm making a Lego treehouse.
She says it was quite fun and she got to relax, but still, she'd rather be somewhere else.
I like being at school more than being in lockdown.
Her mum, Janet, a new entrant teacher, says even though lockdown's tough, it can be good for families.
In general emotional terms, I think that it's really good for the children to be around their whānau when there is uncertainty. So I think that that's a really good time for families to just have a bit of a break together.
She says teachers were flat out last night, trying to rapidly plan for at least the next 3 days in level 4.
Yeah, no, it was definitely everyone at their battle stations last night, making sure iPads are charged and different bits and pieces like that, so that if we do need to roll those out in the next week or so, we'll be able to do that.
Further up the motu in Tamaki Makaurau, Carl Vaso is principal of Rowandale School in Manirewa. It's a Disawan predominantly Māori primary school of nearly 700 pupils. The average household income at the school is about 19 to 21,000. Mr Vaso says he's feeling a lot more prepared than earlier lockdowns. He says they've now got the equipment they need stored up.
Majority of our families actually have to share devices, and in most cases that is possibly a phone or one iPad. And so that was one of the difficulties we had. Given this current situation, we have a whole lot of devices at school ready to roll out if we need.
And they've got a plan for the next few days.
For the remainder of this week, Wednesday through to Thursday, we would just ensure that our own bubbles were safe and that we would provide some online stuff that the parents could connect with. But for us, it's just about getting sorted for Monday, where we launch our home learning program.
At high schools, Post-Primary Teachers Association President Melanie Webber says many students are preparing for mock exams. She's been speaking to teachers over the country.
I've been talking to a lot of Tamaki Makaurau schools and they are absolutely coping. They're straight back on it. They know what they're doing. Most schools seem to be keeping a real focus on student wellbeing in the first instance, so making sure that teachers and students have that time to ease into things.
But down south, she says it's a little bit more up in the air.
I think it's a bit uncertain for the rest of the country, particularly in the South Island, where I think they're probably very hopeful that this is just a 3-day start on it. So I'd imagine that they are taking things slowly, that they are making sure that their students and their teachers are okay and they're preparing for the long haul if it's required.
But she's not doubting the challenges.
It's really hard and people need to be kind to themselves. We will get through this. We've done it before, but it's not easy.
The Ministry of Education advises parents to be calm, reassuring and available.
That's us for tonight. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō from tomorrow morning 5 a.m. First up on where the lockdown here and Australia leaves the All Blacks.
Ahia Himare, RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. There are now 10 community COVID-19 infections in New Zealand, with that number expected to grow overnight. The government says it's possible an Australian returnee who jumped state borders could be the cause of the latest outbreak. Staff at Auckland City Hospital are concerned they could have been exposed to the virus after a nurse at the hospital is one of the positive cases. And the NATO Secretary-General has blamed Afghan politicians for a failure of leadership in allowing the Taliban to seize control of the country. Those are your headlines. Our next news is at 7.
This week on Champions of the Pacific, Papua New Guinea